you or not, you wouldn't know what to want. You couldn't make a decision. And that's what happens with people with those brain injuries. They cannot function rationally at all. Now, the question is why, and that has been discovered. It's been discovered and pieced together partly from people in cognitive linguistics and partly from people in neuroscience and so on. And it goes like this. It turns out that part of what counts as your personality and the way that you function in the world is through cultural narratives, like a rags to riches narrative, for example, or a hero-villain narrative, or you may be, think about the various narratives that you live out or you try to avoid, right? There are lots of them. Each narrative has an intellectual part and it has an emotional part. A hero-villain narrative. The villain does something horrible to a victim, you feel anger. The hero encounters the villain who's powerful. You feel anxious or fearful. The hero wins, you feel satisfaction and joy. Okay? Those connections are there in the brain. The pathways have been figured out. The mechanism is called neural binding. What happens is you have structures in the brain that characterize those narratives. They're neural structures, and they are seamless between the intellectual part of the brain in one place, the emotional regions in another place. They may be in different places, but there are pathways connecting them. And in terms of the way you function, it's not just what is active someplace here versus someplace there, but what the circuitry is doing. Okay? Now, that's another case where you don't just fit the world on its own. Another thing that was discovered was that we think in terms of things called frames and metaphors. Frame is very simple. Imagine a hospital. How do you understand the hospital? There are certain roles played in the hospital. There's a doctor, nurse, receptionist, instruments like scalpels and operating rooms and so on. Okay? There are elements of a hospital. There are relationships between them. There are things that doctors and nurses and patients do. That is, there are scenarios. That collection of roles and scenarios is a frame, and it characterizes your understanding of a hospital. And how do you know what's in and out of the frame? How do you know the boundary? You look at where the frame breaks. You walk into the hospital to visit a friend. You go to the reception desk. The receptionist hands you a scalpel. There's a doctor lying there, and she says, you're operating on the doctor right here. You've broken the frame. Right? You know that that's not part of the hospital. Charles Fillmore, this was discovered in the early 1970s by Irving Goffman. Every institution is understood in this way. Charles Fillmore, also around the same time, great linguist in my department, discovered that every word is defined relative to a frame. Now, how are frames understood in the brain? We have figured out the types of neural circuitry needed to characterize frames. It's taken 20 years, but we have an idea of how this works. There are certain, I won't go into the details of the computational structures, but they're there, and there's a wonderful book about this called From Molecule to Metaphor by my colleague, Jerry Feldman, whose students did a lot of this work. Now, frames are there physically in the brain. You understand the world through them, and then there's metaphor. How does metaphor work? It turns out that when you are a child, you learn hundreds of conceptual metaphors. Metaphors are in your thought process. They're not just in language. They're mechanisms of thought. So you understand, you learn that more is up and less is down. Prices rise and fall. You learn that there are warm people and cold people, and that means affection is warmth. And you learn hundreds of these things by the time you're 6 or 7 years old. How did you learn them? Nobody actually actively taught them to you. You don't even know you know them. You don't even know you're there. They're there. And the language piggybacks on them. How does this work? And by the way, they're the same across languages. We did seminars with people who were speakers of many different languages, and many of them are the same across cultures. You know, certain ones called primary metaphors are universal. How do they arise? We found out in 1997 when Srini Narayanan, one of the people working in neural computation, figured out a neural theory of metaphor, that is the kind of computation system needed to do it, and it came along with a theory of neural learning. And here's how it works. And once you see it, it's real simple. In each such case, let's suppose y is more up and less down. You pour more water in the glass, the level goes up. There's a correlation in your experience between quantity and verticality. Why are there warm people and cold people? Because when you're held as a child, you feel affection and warmth at the same time. Okay, affection and warmth are registered in the brain of every child in different places. Quantity and verticality are registered in the brain of a child in different places. Every time a kid sees someone pour water in the glass and the level go up, two parts of the brain are activated at once. The same thing with being held affectionately. Quantity of temperature and affection are activated together at once in different places. What happens then? You have brain activation in two places. The activation spreads along existing pathways. Each neuron is connected to 10,000 other neurons, and you get massive parallel spreading along existing pathways. When this is repeated, because you repeat this experience every day for a long time, the activation, repeated activation, strengthens the synapses, makes the synapses stronger, and each time the synapses get stronger, the activation spreads further. The next day, spreads further, until, and they spread out along the pathways until the minimal path is reached. When that happens, it continues, only you get double the strengthening, and the other ones die off, and you get a neural circuit that is the metaphor, physically. Metaphors are physically in your brain. You don't know you're there. You've learned them without knowing that you learned them and without being aware of it. And by the time you're 6 or 7, you have hundreds of these. And if people have the same experiences around the world, they have the same metaphors. That is an amazing phenomenon. And it matters for morality and politics. And we'll get back to that in a minute. There's one more thing you need to know about the self-interest part of this. There was an incredible discovery made in Parma, Italy, about 12 years ago, in 1996. It was discovered when people were looking at macaque monkeys. And when you look at the monkeys, what they were doing was they took off parts of the skull and had embedded sensors in the brain so that you could tell when a monkey was performing an action like peeling a banana or something like that, which neurons in the premotor cortex choreographs actions, complex actions, which neurons exactly were firing with which tasks. And they had a computer keeping track of this for the level of firing of every neuron. And the computer would make noises when they had a noise set up so that you knew it was working. It would go click, 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 click whenever there was firing. So they were measuring these things for pressing bars and peeling bananas and grasping rings and so on. And then, it being Italy, the experimenter at lunchtime said, oh, time to go to lunch. Let's have a good lunch. He goes, has a good lunch. He comes back. There's a pile of bananas there. He picks up a banana, starts to peel it, and he hears click, 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 click. Uh-oh. It's connected to the monkey, not me. Why is it going click, 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 click? And the answer is that these neurons fire when the monkey performs an action or sees